Access to Democracy is made possible by donations from the following organizations. Thomson Reuters, a global company with expertise and insight to unravel complex situations in the areas of law, tax, compliance, government, and media. Their worldwide network of journalists and editors keep customers up to speed on relevant global events. Crutchfield Dermatology, a full-service treatment center and Medi-Spa in Eagan. Their goal is to help you look good and feel great with beautiful skin. With service built around courtesy, dignity, and respect, Mayo-trained Dr. Charles Crutchfield personally treats each patient and is acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. Truestone Financial, with locations in Minnesota and Wisconsin, has proudly served its members since 1939. Truestone engages, educates, and supports its members to ensure they have the tools to empower their financial well-being. Truestone Financial, your neighborhood credit union. Learn more at truestone.org. Edina Eye Physicians and Surgeons, a division of Twin Cities Eye Consultants, has proudly served the Twin Cities for more than 55 years now in 7 convenient locations. Using the most advanced technology combined with human touch, Edina Eye offers comprehensive services and dedicated specialists committed to excellence, with innovative procedures and expertise for the most advanced eye care.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Access to Democracy. I'm Steve Francisco and it's my pleasure to welcome to our studio today Congresswoman Angie Craig, who represents the 2nd Congressional District of Minnesota. Angie, welcome to the show today. Thank you for being with us.
Well, it's just great to be back.
And can you tell us just briefly, the current 2nd Congressional District, the boundaries are about to change a little bit, but right now, what counties and cities are included in the 2nd CD?
Well, in redistricting, it looked like a big change on the map, and it certainly is, Steve. We fall in love with all of our own congressional district. That's just something that members of Congress do.
You get attached to them.
I'm so attached to Goodhue County and Wabasha County, and I lost them in the redistricting. I did pick up, though, LeSueur County, so I'm looking forward to getting to know my future constituents there. And I gained a little bit more of Washington County. I already had a little bit, but I got Newport, I got a little bit of Woodbury. So. Yeah. A little more Rice County too. So the bulk of the 2nd is still Dakota and Scott County, but I picked up some great areas, but you always fall in love.
And Dakota County, people usually know in the 2nd CD we have cities such as Apple Valley, Eagan, Lakeville, Burnsville, where the bulk of the population is, but people are sometimes surprised to learn you represent farmers too in some of those counties that you were talking about.
You know, what's been great about serving the 2nd District is it's a truly unique congressional district. Right now in the 2nd District, the current district, 65% of our land is covered in corn and soybeans. So that gives you a perspective of why it's so important for me to serve on the Energy and Commerce Committee and the Agriculture Committee. And by the way, 94% of our businesses are small businesses, which is why I also serve on the Small Business Committee as well.
So your committee assignments in the U.S. House, they fit very neatly with what the interests and concerns are of people who live in this district.
You literally advocate for your committee assignments once you get to Congress, and I wanted my assignments to really reflect the vastness of the people that I serve, and I'm really pleased with how that worked out.
Very good. So let's get right into it. I think probably the one issue, there are several issues we want to talk about today within our time constraints, but I think the one that probably is on the top of most people's minds right now is the state of our economy. If you really look at it, it seems like it's a tale of two economies, that if you're concerned about job growth, there's some very good news actually out today that the economy has created during the month of June 372,000 new jobs that were added, which exceeded what was predicted for the economy. But on the negative side, sadly, consumers are dealing with this terrible inflation and dealing with supply chain shortages. So my question to you, Congresswoman, would be, How did we get here? And more importantly, what can we do to get out of this situation?
Well, do you have about 3 hours? Because I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
You don't. Look, we got here, and I said from the beginning of this pandemic, this is going to be a little bit like whack-a-mole, that old game at Chuck E. Cheese that I used to take my 4 kids to play. And it certainly has been. As you said, we continue to add jobs to this economy. Unemployment, the unemployment rate is a record low in Minnesota. We've got the second lowest rate in the country, but of course that creates additional challenges when you have a growing economy that you need workforce. And the truth is that the supply chain challenges that have been produced from the COVID pandemic, the additional pressure from Russia's invasion of Ukraine on our food supply chain, on energy around the country, it's created some additional challenges for us. So your question is the good one. So what do we do about it? Well, number one, we acknowledge that Minnesotans are struggling, first and foremost. So I know the cost of gas, I know the cost of groceries, and especially the cost of healthcare prescription drugs is a real challenge. So I've been focused on, number one, it's been a challenging 3.5 years as a country. I still think it was the right decision to go in and invest in things like the Paycheck Protection Program to save that all those small businesses, those local restaurants that are still open because we saved them.
That if they didn't get that money, they might not be here, probably wouldn't be here in our communities today.
They wouldn't be here. Unemployment would be higher, and of course we would have had to continue to support those unemployed Americans. So it's always been whack-a-mole. I think the Fed has acknowledged they waited too late to start addressing inflation. They did not anticipate it. All of that is we are where we are. What I want to be as a public servant to this district is someone focused on, okay, well, we are where we are. Some metrics are doing really well. But how can we address the issues? And so that's why I've called for a tax holiday on the federal and state gas tax. That's why I got across the finish line. I'm the first member of Congress to get across the finish line a bill that allows year-round sales of E15 ethanol, which if you put it in your gas tank can be 40 to 70 cents cheaper than regular unleaded gasoline. That's why I called before the president did it to release more oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That's why I'm taking on Big Pharma to lower the cost of health care.
Let's go back for a second to the gas tax issue, because the temporary holiday in the gas tax, the president's proposed a 3-month suspension of the federal gas tax. Also, states should be looking at suspending the gas tax for some period of time. 3 months seems reasonable to give consumers a little relief at the pump, but it would translate into a savings. I saw one figure would help by 50 cents per gallon if you were to temporarily suspend those gas taxes.
That's exactly right. And as I was driving down 42 this morning on the way to some official events, I was noticing that the last several weeks, couple of weeks, 3 weeks, the gas price has been ticking down. So if you think about that, we'd be almost back, if the federal and state government did a tax holiday on gas, we'd be almost down to a price per gallon that started with a 2.
Right.
We're at
Right.
354, 352. I saw something in Apple Valley the other day at 432. Sorry, 342. We're ticking down. It's good, but this is a crisis. We need to address the crisis at
Right.
hand, and I hope it gets better. I really do.
And inflation is particularly hard on our seniors, on people living on fixed incomes, on working families that are struggling. You're hearing about labor shortages, but sadly we've seen some of the wages have been lagging. If you believe in supply side economics, the idea that when there's a shortage of labor, wages should go up. But we're still seeing some wage growth lagging even though prices are going up. And that's really putting the pinch on working families, isn't it?
It is, and seniors have often additional worries, and that is the cost of their medications.
Yeah.
I was just visiting a pharmacy in the district yesterday in Burnsville, and talking about the number of seniors that are starting to fall into the donut hole from a prescription drug price perspective and the money that they've spent this year. So that is one reason why I'm such a strong proponent of Medicare negotiating drug pricing. The country, if you want to talk about fiscal responsibility, it is one of the ways that we could be incredibly fiscally responsible and help reduce the deficit is if the largest purchaser of health care in our nation simply said to the pharma companies, we want you to compete for our business.
But Big Pharma has been resistant to that kind of competition, and I can't help but note that a lot of Republicans in the U.S. House and Senate receive big campaign contributions from those same pharmaceutical companies.
Well,
so they could do something now to help seniors get some relief on their drug prices, medication.
Instead, Republican-controlled Congresses have done the opposite. They have literally written into federal law that Medicare cannot negotiate its drug pricing. Think about that for a minute.
Terrible.
No business would run itself that way. And so this is something that you're exactly right. Pharma has a significant special interest, and they don't like the fact that I'm willing to stand up to them, but that's not going to change what I do, for sure.
We should mention, too, talk about supply chain issues for a moment. You were a co-founder of the Bipartisan Supply Chain Caucus. What's the mission of that caucus?
Well, the mission is to listen to good ideas and put them into legislation. Again, it's a bipartisan commission. One of the one of the bills that we passed recently, the Ocean Shipping Reform Act. You know, we all saw those shipping containers sitting in the ports.
Los Angeles, hundreds of ships sitting out there.
Hundreds of ships. That law that we recently passed will make sure that the Maritime Administrator is able to not let those shipping containers go back empty, because remember, that's what was happening, is they would get them unloaded here and they would just ship them back empty.
Which drives up the cost of shipping.
Which drives up the cost of shipping. And so I think we're starting to get some of those things sorted, but the truth is most of those supply chains were private sector supply chains. We have too much of our reliance on critical things like drugs and food and agriculture that comes from outside the United States. So I've also, it's two things, right? It's making sure that we have an effective supply chain into the country, that things are efficient. But when you think about it, two things need to happen. One, we need to incentivize companies to manufacture here in America. We have got to do that in this country. That will help de-risk our supply chain. The other thing that we've had, which has been incredibly challenging, but when you think about the amount of goods that America imports from China, China did not develop as effective a vaccine as we did. And that is just a great accomplishment on the part of our nation.
It's a miracle when you
companies.
think that in the space of less than a year from when the coronavirus appeared, that our scientists developed effective vaccines, multiple effective vaccines.
That's right. And that allowed people to get back to work and production to increase quickly. In China, they have still been living under a zero tolerance policy for COVID. Think about all the goods that used to come to America that aren't being manufactured in China. They're held up.
Just recently I saw in the news that Shanghai was just starting to ease some of the restrictions, but they've had a very difficult time.
And then Steve, just one more thing, consolidation in certain specific sectors. When you have 40% of the market for baby formula held by one company, anytime there is a problem at a plant, you're going to have a supply chain issue when you think about that. So how can we make sure meat processing is another industry sector where that's been a real problem? So how can we think about diversifying our supply chains?
And to try to get on top of these issues before they become big problems.
Exactly.
Let's switch gears here, sadly, to a subject that is very disturbing. According to the Gun Violence Archive, there have been 281 mass shootings so far this year, mass shooting being defined as 4 or more persons killed. We saw the racist shooter in Buffalo, New York, killed 10 people. Uvalde, Texas, heartbreaking, 19 children murdered and 2 adults in their school in Texas. And just on the 4th of July, Highland Park, Illinois, near Chicago, 7 dead, dozens injured in mass shootings. Congress recently passed the first significant gun reform legislation in nearly 30 years, which gives money to states for red flag laws, expanded background checks for people 18 to 21 years old, and expands an existing law preventing people convicted of domestic abuse from owning a gun to include dating partners, not just spouses or former spouses. Do you support closing the gun show loophole and expanded background checks on all gun sales? Because right now, federal law allows private sales and gun show sales to be exempt from any background check requirements.
Steve, I think that the gun violence epidemic is one of the largest challenges that we have as a nation. Look, it's been a devastating summer so far when it comes to gun violence, and Highland Park was just sort of the punctuation mark. The
Horrible.
stories.
At an Independence Day parade.
You know, Steve, I marched in 2 parades on the 4th of July, one in Eagan and one in Apple Valley, and you know, I still see the faces of my neighbors at those parades and can imagine what it must have been like in Highland Park. But regardless, of course, I support universal background checks. I voted in the Congress on the House side for universal background checks. Frankly, you know, I supported the gun safety legislation that came before us a couple of weeks ago. You're right, it was the first major legislation passed in 30 years. It's still not sufficient.
Right.
So I think that's the message that I've been sending to my constituents is, if our job is to protect public safety, then the fact that Americans can't go to their places of worship, to 4th of July parades,
grocery store,
to grocery stores,
anywhere,
and to schools
yeah,
without fear of assault weapons being used in a major mass shooting. And look, it's the assault weapons. I mean, let's just be honest here.
Would you support reinstating the Feinstein Amendment that was federal law for 10 years from 1994 to 2004, but it was sunsetted, and in 2004 there were not the votes in the Congress to extend that? Should these weapons of war be banned again?
Steve, I don't think that it is a conflict for me to say I support the Second Amendment. You know, my family over the years have been members of the West End Trap Club here in Eagan, and to say that weapons of war should not be on the streets of America. Our families would be safer, our police officers and first responders would be safer if they weren't facing a weapon that can fire off so many rounds in such a short period of time.
Up to 100 rounds a minute.
And if you go back to 2004, I saw a chart recently, and I don't have the data, but fresh in mind, but that chart which showed what happened with mass shootings in America after the expiration of that particular law. And so the assault weapons ban was there for a reason.
And
right?
when people say, as I've heard some people say, that, well, you don't need the Feinstein Amendment because it won't stop all mass shootings, it maybe won't stop all shootings, but even if it stops some, and it's obvious from the data, as you point out, Angie, that it did prevent some mass shootings. So why wouldn't we want to reinstate it? Now, the political reality may be that in the current U.S. Senate, as it's currently composed, there aren't the votes there to repeal it right now. So really, this becomes another issue that's going to be in the hands of voters in November.
Right.
Do you want to vote for people who aren't for reasonable legislation and regulation of guns, or do you want to leave it the way it is? And if we leave it the way it is, aren't we going to keep seeing more of these mass shootings?
I think we are, and we've traumatized this generation of children. You know, my kids grew up in a time where active shooter drills were a normal part of their school life. And I know many parents in the 2nd District feel exactly the same way. We've traumatized our children by prioritizing weapons of war ownership over the safety of our children.
Right.
And
I
it's
hear
just
people
wrong.
often say, they talk about the Second Amendment. We did a program, Alan and I did, about guns and the Second Amendment, and we pointed out that the Second Amendment is not absolute. Even Justice Scalia said that. There's room for reasonable regulation. The Constitution's not a suicide pact,
Right.
and that there has to be a place for protecting public safety while balancing the rights to responsible gun ownership.
Most responsible gun owners that I talk with who support the Second Amendment also support common sense gun safety reform. And that's exactly how I would characterize myself as a gun owner, as someone who supports common sense gun safety reform. You know, right after Uvalde, I said, just raise the age to 21. Why should an 18-year-old who can't go buy a pack of cigarettes, who can't go buy a beer, be allowed to purchase an assault weapon?
Under current federal law, an 18-year-old can buy a handgun,
Right,
but
Right.
can't buy an assault weapon.
that's right,
Yeah.
that's right. So it makes no sense. It's just not
Or, I'm
common
sorry,
sense.
did I get that right? I think I said it
You
in
said
reverse.
it the reverse, but an 18-year-old can't buy a
An
handgun.
18-year-old
but
can buy an
buy-
assault
That's
weapon,
right,
but
an
a
assault weapon.
21-year-old
That's
cannot buy a handgun under current federal law.
Yeah.
And as we saw, we've seen the consequences already
Yeah.
of what happens with that.
It's devastating.
And you know, when people talk about, they take an absolute position on gun ownership and say, you know, there shouldn't be any regulation whatsoever, and they talk about their freedom. How about the freedom of these victims? How about the freedom of the people who were murdered? How about children murdered in an elementary school? I would have thought our country would have come further after Newtown.
Right.
And yet here we have Uvalde, and it
Right.
just keeps happening. So let us hope
Steve,
we
what
make...
about the freedom to go to a 4th of July parade
Exactly.
and enjoy yourself?
Exactly. Let's turn to another topic with the remaining time we have, and it's winding down fast. The U.S. Supreme Court recently overturned Roe versus Wade, a decision that has been in place that women and families have relied upon for nearly half a century. The decision in 1973 that said during the first trimester of pregnancy, it is a woman's decision to decide whether or not to terminate the pregnancy or not. Your reaction to this overturning of Roe versus Wade?
Look, this is going to be devastating for women and families. This infringes the freedom, reproductive freedom, and privacy of every woman in America. And frankly, just sort of standing by and saying it's a states' right issue. Let's take the case in Ohio from last week that emerged. A 10-year-old rape victim is going to be told she has to have her rapist's baby.
And the president talked about this morning in announcing a new executive order. She had to go to another state
That's right.
to be able to get an abortion,
right.
because to show you how radical these laws are in some of the states that the court has thrown it back to the states, no exceptions in cases of rape or incest.
That's right.
This is not a conservative decision. First of all, you don't throw out a 50-year judicial precedent the way this court has. But secondly, to basically take away a constitutional right. I understand this is the first time in the history of our country that the court has taken away a constitutional right. Normally, the history of the court has been to expand constitutional rights. And it says something about how radical this Supreme Court is. There's no other way to put it.
This isn't a conservative Supreme Court. This is an extremist, activist Supreme Court. And not only are they coming after Roe, they're coming after contraception next, the ability to plan when and how you choose to have a family. They're coming after marriage equality next, which of course impacts many families, including my own in this congressional district. And the broader question is this for the people of the 2nd and Minnesota. Do you think the government belongs in any of these personal decisions? Isn't this really a right to privacy issue for Americans? It's about freedoms. It's about individual choice. And, you know, I keep talking about this. Yes, Roe was overturning the ability to get an abortion, but this theory from this extremist activist court is going to transcend to daily life in a way that we haven't experienced in my lifetime.
Congress is going to need to pass legislation to codify Roe versus Wade, right?
Right. So the House has already passed legislation to codify Roe, which would mean that the Supreme Court couldn't overturn it. This is the law of the land. This is not an interpretation. This is what your legislators said has to be the law. But we also have insurgent GOP, frankly, my own opponent in the next election, who wants to ensure that we have laws to ban abortion nationwide. They are literally working on a nationwide abortion ban right now at a federal level. What would that mean? It would mean it wouldn't matter what we want to do here in Minnesota, because it would be completely banned across the nation.
And it's been interesting to me that your opponent has not spoken to this issue. He's been asked by the media numerous times now, what is your position on the Supreme Court decision? And I think perhaps because he knows his position may not be popular to a lot of voters in the 2nd Congressional District.
Yeah, Tyler Kistner's not said one word since Roe was overturned. He has in the past said, in his own primary battles last cycle, that he is 100% pro-life, and he is supported by organizations that oppose abortion even in the case of rape and incest. Wow. So if you're going to leave it to the states, this is what you're going to get, and that is not the world that the country that I want to live in.
We're down to about 2.5 minutes, and we can't let you leave today without talking about the threats to our democracy. I think you would probably agree with me, the revelations that have come out of the work of the January 6th committee in Congress headed by Benny Thompson of Mississippi, and including Congresswoman Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, has been a shocking eye-opener about the lengths that former President Trump went to nullify a presidential election, the first time in history. Should the committee, if they were to decide to make a criminal referral, if this question came before the House, would you support a criminal referral to the Justice Department based on the evidence uncovered by the January 6th committee?
Well, I tell you, I want to let the committee do its work. I was there on January 6th. I had to shelter in place in hiding on January 6th. I literally barricaded my office on January 6th, and then I was relocated to the large room that people later saw with staff and members of Congress. I want to let the committee do their work. There are details and there is information that I didn't know until a month ago.
They're getting, according to numerous members of the committee, Adam Schiff mentioned, the testimony of Ms. Hutchinson recently has resulted in a lot of people coming out providing new information to the committee, which is not yet publicly available.
That's right, Steve. And I think the truth is that when Merrick Garland said, "I will follow the facts no matter where they lead me," the Department of Justice needs to follow the facts no matter where they lead him. And I would say to you that I've always believed no one is above the law.
I applaud your position, and I think that's really essential. Otherwise, we don't really have a democracy, and we really don't believe that no one's above the law if we give certain people a pass, including a former president of the United States.
That's exactly right.
We shall see. Congresswoman Angie Craig, thank you so much for being with us today on Access to Democracy. Thank you for the work you do on behalf of the people of the 2nd Congressional District, and we look forward to having you on. I know there's much more we could talk about in the future, so you'll have to come back and visit us again.
Thank you so much, Steve. Great to see you. Thank you.